Welcome back to our pre-debate interviews. We've been speaking with all of our debaters this afternoon, get their thoughts on the topic before the House tonight, the global refugee crisis. It's a real pleasure, frankly, a personal pleasure to welcome Simon Schama. He's a historian and author we've all read. I've read a number of your books, like so many people, and have enjoyed his thoughtful, nuanced, and kind of textured analysis of history. He's also, I guess, I consider one of the really important cultural commentators of our time, and a professor now at Columbia. Is that correct? Yes. Great. Well, Simon, thank you so much for coming to Toronto to be part of this, because we thought in this debate, we have to have a historian. There has to be someone here with a bit of a historical memory, because this is an issue that the media often kind of treats sui generis, when in fact great migrations are an essential part of human history. So I wonder if you could just situate what we're seeing now in the context of recent history and European history.
Well, there are both, important analogies. There's no doubt we're seeing the terrible word that historians used to use in the 60s when I was growing up, called transhumans. Not transgender, but transhumans. So it just means vast millions of people being displaced and trying to find a place to live. And on the one hand, one thinks of the long period of the collapse of the Roman Empire, a long, long time ago. But it's much more reminiscent, really, of what happened in the 1940s, or perhaps even in the period towards the end of the First World War, going through the period of the Greco-Turkish War, which was terrible. And one forgets, actually, how elastic, in not a good way, borders were anyway. Great empires had collapsed. Nobody knew what nation states really were. And the war threw up horrific moments of inter-ethnic violence. And the League of Nations was partly founded, one of its briefs was to try and deal with that. And the same thing was true, that was renewed in the aftermath of the Second World War. This is really quite like the 1940s in a way. You have a great backwash of people. But in a way it's worse, only in the sense it's sort of unexpected. And everybody had seen the horror of vast numbers of people on the roads from the beginning of the Second World War through to the end of it. I'm not saying they were prepared, for how it would turn out, with huge numbers of Germans uprooted from Poland, other members, other peoples in Eastern Europe going the opposite direction. This one is sort of different, partly I think because we're so inured to almost nothing that shakes us anymore. A mother with a battered tiny suitcase and an even more battered 4-year-old clinging to her. And how long was it before people started yawning at the spectacle of small children washed up on the beach? I got taken to task on British television for saying it was okay to have an emotional reaction about seeing children drowning as their hands left their parents' arms. And that was thought to be very un-British. Maybe I don't give a toss if it is.
Right, no, stiff upper lip. Exactly. You'll hear it tonight, I'm sure, from your opponents, that this time is different in no small part because of the religious beliefs and culture of
They better know a lot
about
that. Nigel Farage had better be very learned on Salafism, or I'll have him for breakfast, actually, because it's fine to talk about that, but you need to make the case that Salafism and Islam are the same thing, and you actually need to know the difference between Wahhabism and Salafism. If you're going to open your mouth at all about this, fine, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they're very scholarly about it, and know, for example, all the good Muslims in the trenches battling against a jihadi version of Salafism. And I'm not going to give the game away. There was one particular hero whose life is in danger, who does nothing else with his life. So the issue is whether or not you you make the claim in the kind of most absurdly horrifying way, the Trumpian way of saying every Muslim is a threat by virtue of being a Muslim. Every Muslim hides some ferociously intransigent urge to wage jihad and bring down the West. Or you actually be a bit more intelligently discriminating about it, in my view. So you can see I'm getting worked up already, which is not good rehearsal technique, actually. No. And also it's true, I think actually what's very important to remember is exactly the same thing was said about they want to destroy the West, about the migrations into America and no doubt into Canada at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. If you look up what was being said, it was said, well, they not only are filthy, they live off garbage, they can't speak English, they also harbor destructive intentions. Amidst the millions who are coming, welcomed by the Statue of Liberty and Emma Lazarus's lines, are anarchists and communists and revolutionaries. And they were right, there were. There were a series of bombings in 1919 and the Wall Street bombing in 1920. But did that stop the general principle of the liberal democracies being tough enough and strong enough and absorptive enough to take that on and survive? Of course it didn't. Mm-hmm.
Now, Mark Stein in that chair just 15 minutes ago argued that those liberal democracies were different then. They were more confident about their culture. They were more able to kind of imprint a set of shared values. And I guess from his conservative critique of contemporary society as being too relativistic,
I agree with him about
valueless,
that. No, well, I don't agree quite with that. I agree with the essential point that we've done an incredibly cowardly, bad job about saying what the rules of a tolerant, pluralist, liberal society have to be. I suspect he and I would differ. We might not. We might both invoke John Locke. There are, I suspect, plenty of things that he and I might agree on, which is bad news for your debate. You don't tolerate the intolerant. That was said by Milton and then by John Locke. But it is incumbent on you, actually, to be extremely forthright in upholding those essential values, at least in order to have something worth defending. You can't just do it as a defense of shopping. And movies. That won't do it. So I agree with him about that.
Would you agree also with him that Europe fundamentally does not have a successful multicultural model and therefore is unable to integrate large numbers of non-Europeans?
No, I think Britain actually has done an amazing job until Salafism came along. You think about, turn on the radio in the morning, and Today program, first voice you hear is Michel Hussein, or you hear Razi Iqbal, and on, British football will be crap without actually all kinds of people from immigrant descent. My greengrocer is a Kurd. The newsagent, who always points out when I'm in the Jewish Chronicle, is called Ahmed. So for a long time, actually, I'm not saying that Southall and Bradford were, completely problem-free, but to the extent, actually, that there has been a place, and I think it's partly because, if you think about it historically, for better or worse, it might have been worse. Britain got out of India, including Muslim India, quickly. France did not. Mm-hmm. And France's long, long war in Algeria and its painful, tormented relationship with the Maghreb made that, I think, in the end, a much more difficult and savage kind of process, really, I'd say.
Where do you think this crisis goes from here? Do you think...
it changes every day. I mean...
Does Europe survive this? Does Europe...
I don't know. That's a very good question. I think the only honest... There are so many things wrong with... and I'm actually in favor of remaining in Europe. Still have my British passport, though I live in New York. But there are so many things. Again, Europe has to find some sort of identity, which is simply more than managing the business cycle, actually. I mean, they needn't have the founding fathers gathered at Philadelphia, but something has to happen. And the problem, it seemed to be happening with Angela Merkel's naive but magnificent hospitality, and then suddenly it was all a mistake, and we had Fortress Europe, and we had the Danes taking jewelry off people's necks and throats as corollary for their right to stay. So it is in a desperate place, I think, actually. So I actually don't know the answer, Roger, to that.
Do you worry?
It's a big test. It's a big moral test.
Do you worry particularly about the rise of the far right? We've seen recent gains in Germany in the state elections.
Yeah, you do. It's been happening, in countries like Hungary with Jobbik, and the strength. I mean, at the moment, Marine Le Pen is way ahead of potential opposition in the presidential polls. This is terrifying. And I wish people wouldn't always Nazify it, really. Authoritarian nationalism can be quite bad enough without having to be a clone of the Nazis. It's not, but it's a bleak kind of place, I think.
And then just finally, to tap into your larger sense of the warp and woof of history, where does the larger crisis go? The situation in the Middle East, this blossoming of these series of failed states, the potential, I guess, for additional waves of migration to come out of that area. Yeah. Do you see a prolonged period of instability?
It's not looking great. I mean, from the kind of the orbiting satellite view, what's extraordinary is there are three great problems. One is the slow death of the planet, beside which everything else is very small potatoes. Second is the staggeringly expanding inequalities between North and South, developing and underdeveloped world, inside industrial societies too. But third is something, when we were growing up, we didn't actually think was going to be a huge problem. How do you find living space for people who are not like you without the obligation of oppressing or possibly murdering each other? And it just needs, it needs facing eloquently and with a good deal of kind of moral strength and honesty, which I know isn't much of an answer. But what I'm looking for is that the United Nations is so supine about this, really. It'd be interesting to hear what Louise has to say about that. But even compared with the kind of the utterances of the United Nations immediately after the war, the occasional good-natured bleat from Ban Ki-moon really does not do it.
Good. Well, Simon, look, I've always wanted to interview you. I've now had the opportunity to do that. So thank you for allowing me to check something off my bucket list. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to conclude our interviews tonight. Simon, Schama, the other debaters, appearing at 7 p.m. Eastern. That'll be live on this website, but it'll also be live across North America. Here in Canada, our public affairs channel will be showing it coast to coast. C-SPAN across the United States will also be broadcasting the debate live on their main channel. So be sure to tune in. It's going to be an edifying debate, an important one for us to have. So that's it from us here at Roy Thomson Hall. We'll see you again at 7 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for tuning in.